The great audit had ended. Throughout the vast cafeteria overlooking the amphitheater of worlds, delegates whispered nervously. Conversations that had once revolved around fleets and territorial disputes had narrowed to a single topic. Threat level 11. General Kheron, now a retired delegate of the Carapax people, moved slowly through the crowd carrying a tray of mineral broth. Earlier that day, the Grand AI system, Catalyst, had classified the Carapax as Threat Level 5, a respected military power with centuries of strategic tradition behind it. General, Kheron turned to find Professor Talix, her crystalline markings shifting with unease. The Callian mathematician had occupied the neighboring seat throughout the month-long proceedings, earning his mutual respect. "I've heard you worked alongside humans during your military career," she said as they made their way toward the cafeteria windows. Kheron's mandibles clicked softly. "I survived the experience, yes." The two delegates settled into a quiet corner overlooking the amphitheater. Talix hesitated. When Catalyst classified humanity, it called spite their primary data marker. "General, what exactly does that mean?" Kheron set down his tray. "It means humans have an unfortunate habit of taking things very personally." Talix's crystalline patterns dimmed in confusion. "That makes no sense." The retired general fell silent, collecting memories he had spent centuries trying to organize into logic. "To be honest, Professor," he said at last, "I'm not entirely certain I understand it even now." His mandibles clicked softly. "But I first encountered it during a joint military exercise involving 5 coalition species and 1 human battalion. By day 21 of the joint coalition war games on the arid, dust-choked world of Oros Prime, my official assessment of the United Earth delegation was codified into a single, unshakable tactical conclusion: aggressively mediocre. Their performance throughout the exercise had been difficult to criticize and equally difficult to praise. They followed orders, completed objectives, and generally avoided making serious mistakes. They won some drills, lost others, and rarely stood out from the other contingents. If anything, their most notable characteristic was how ordinary they seemed compared to the reputation that preceded them. As a veteran of the Carapax High Command, I view warfare through the cold, unyielding lens of pure logic and psychological optimization. To me, military personnel are variables in a mathematical equation. The other species gathered for this friendly exercise understood this implicitly. The avian Vren legions marched with flawless geometric precision across the dunes, their terrestrial scouts cutting through sightlines like razor blades. The massive reptilian Krelk vanguard treated every routine drill like an existential holy war, their heavy scales practically vibrating with terrifying hyper-focused discipline. Joining them were the Silfari, a slender and tall, pale green species with pointed ears who possessed a natural, uncanny grace and operated as peerless marksmen, treating the battlefield like an art canvas of kinetic perfection. On the other hand, there were the Bracca, a cold, deeply intellectual species renowned for their macro-tactical and strategic genius, who processed entire combat sectors as real-time, multidimensional chessboards. And finally, the humans, by contrast, defied all known principles of military philosophy. It was not a matter of gross incompetence or a lack of basic hygiene. Contrary to some of the harsher rumors circulated by the Vren, the humans did not wear rumpled or unkempt uniforms. To suggest so would be an insult to the foundational standards of any planetary army. Their gear was clean, their boots were laced, and their ranks were straight. No, the issue was that their standard-issue utility uniforms simply looked fundamentally plain and unimpressive compared to the ceremonial armor-plated splendor of the other factions. They possessed no shimmering iridescent feathers, no natural spiked carapaces, and no intimidating bioluminescent crests. They were just remarkably ordinary. Worse than their aesthetic mediocrity, however, was their staggering level of casual indifference. The human team was led by Commander Sterling Steele Cross, a man whose reputation for battlefield pragmatism apparently didn't include maintaining a dramatic military posture. I frequently observed Commander Cross leaning comfortably against supply crates during high-level tactical briefings, slowly sipping a bitter, steaming black fluid he called coffee from a dented thermal mug, looking entirely unbothered by the grand galactic spectacle around him. His lead mechanic, Sergeant Jax, a legitimate, certified military occupational specialist responsible for keeping their armored assets rolling, spent his designated off hours napping peacefully in the shade under the chassis of a heavy troop transport. Meanwhile, the human tech expert, Corporal Maya Lin, had already been formally reprimanded twice by my staff for jury-rigging the base's high-frequency tactical array to stream low-resolution terrestrial sitcoms into her monitoring station. The humans also possessed an inexplicable tendency to assign names to their military vehicles. Not tactical designations. Names. I had observed armored transports bearing titles such as Roadhouse, Harmless and Mostly Harmless painted directly onto their hulls. Commander Cross had explained this bizarre practice with a simple shrug. It helps morale. I had decided not to ask further questions. They lack the warrior's fire, General Thrax of the Krelk had observed to me earlier that week, watching Sergeant Jax lazily toss a small rubber ball against a bunker wall. They are entirely unserious. I was inclined to agree. Because this was a friendly exercise designed to prevent actual casualties, the Coalition utilized advanced neural link bodysuits. When a soldier was hit by a simulated plasma bolt from a training rifle, the suit delivered a sharp, localized spike of real pain directly to the nervous system to mimic the psychological stakes of actual combat. The armor plates would then immediately shift color. A bright yellow glow indicated the soldier was wounded, but still functional, while a solid crimson light meant they were officially deemed ineffective or dead, instantly locking them out of the simulation. Whenever a human's suit flashed yellow during the first 3 weeks, they didn't offer a stoic warrior's roar or a vow of blood vengeance. They usually just groaned, swore casually under their breath, and sluggishly dragged themselves over to the nearest medical crate to wait out the penalty clock. They were doing just fine, but just fine was a statistical embarrassment compared to the hyper-focused, pain-ignoring perfection of the other teams. On the dawn of the 4th and final week, the closing phase of the War Games was officially initiated, the Siege of Ridge 99. All factions gathered on the central briefing grounds, a massive, dust-swept amphitheater of plastibrick and steel built to hold the thousands of soldiers participating in the exercise. I stepped down into the dust, pacing slowly across the stone staging floor like an ancient drill instructor inspecting a fresh batch of conscripts. "Listen up," I growled, my voice amplified by my armor's localized vocal projector. A single heavily fortified strategic post sits at the dead center of a jagged, labyrinthine canyon grid. Whichever species manages to capture that central post will have to dig in, establish a defensive perimeter, and hold it against the combined, relentless and simultaneous ground assaults of the other factions for 7 continuous days. No reinforcements, no external resupply. The team at the top of the ridge must hold that post until the final second ticks down on the 7th day. I paused, stopping my stride. I let out a long, heavy hiss that rattled through my vocal system, letting my mandibles click with heavily orchestrated frustration. Now was the time to transition into the mandated psychological degradation protocol. In the Carapax military doctrine, this standard procedure was highly scientific, designed to lower baseline morale by 15% to 30%. The true purpose was an efficiency test, a rigorous evaluation of how each species performed under the compounding weight of low morale, degraded focus, and psychological duress. But to ensure the subjects didn't suspect this was merely a calculated test, the execution had to feel entirely organic. It needed a personal, emotionally driven frame. "Before we launch," I began, my tone shifting into an icy, venomous drawl, "there is something I must get off my chest. In my 3 centuries of distinguished service to the Carapac's High Command, I have conducted dozens of high-stakes military exercises across the quadrant, but this particular cycle is one I will remember for the rest of my days, solely for the sheer, unadulterated incompetence I have been forced to witness. Do not mistake my words for malice. It is not personal. It is simply the objective, unvarnished truth. The amphitheater went dead silent. Excellent. The bait was taken. I began to walk the line, deliberately moving closer to each individual team to deliver the systematic, bureaucratic roasting directly to their faces. I stopped first in front of the avian platoon, towering over their lead officer. I've seen decorative garden statues show more initiative under pressure, I hissed, watching them stiffen. Your formations are beautiful. Truly beautiful. If war were a parade, you'd be unstoppable. Unfortunately, the enemy has shown a stubborn tendency to shoot back. Your formations move like a flock of panicked dust mites, fleeing a broom once the shooting begins. The Vren soldiers ruffled their feathers in visible shame, their crests flattening as I felt their collective morale take a heavy, satisfying dip. I spun around and marched directly into the space of the giant reptiles, the Krelk. You rely on intimidation because, frankly, it saves you from having to think. There was a dead silence in their formations. Your strategy begins and ends with standing somewhere large and hoping the enemy becomes impressed enough to surrender. When forced to adapt, your battlefield creativity resembles furniture. The Krelk hissed under their breath, their heavy tails thumping against the dirt as they visibly deflated. I marched onward, stopping right before the tall, pale green marksmen, the Silfari, eyeing their immaculate gear. You call yourselves marksmen, I said flatly, holding up the performance report. 3 weeks of bragging about superior reflexes and precision, yet under pressure, half of you suddenly remembered the ancient art of missing. I continued without mercy. If your accuracy drops any lower, the only thing you'll be hitting is coalition ammunition budgets. The Silfari stiffened, their pointed ears twitching in deep offense as they glared back at me. I stepped over to the cold, rigid intellectuals. And you, the Braca, I sneered. I regret to inform you that war occasionally happens before your meetings conclude. A few heads lifted. Your planning is exquisite. Beautiful, even. Unfortunately, by the time you finish discussing contingencies, everyone else has already fought the battle. The Braca remained rigid, but the subtle clicking of their armor panels betrayed their spike in cognitive stress. Finally, I rounded on the human contingent, closing the distance until I was standing directly in front of their command staff. I had intentionally saved the longest, most severe tongue-lashing for them, pulling directly from the extensive data of their 3-week slouch. And then we have the unenthusiastic professional of United Earth Delegation, I barked, my voice dripping with calculated disgust. For 3 weeks I have tried to determine whether your casual attitude is confidence or simply a complete lack of shame. A few humans exchanged glances. You joke during briefings. You argue about food during operational planning. Your vehicles carry names that would earn disciplinary action in a professional military. Half the time you behave less like soldiers and more like a group of friends who accidentally wandered into a war, I continued. Your tactics rely on improvisation far more than preparation. Your command structure appears suspiciously informal. Frankly, I have seen civilian construction crews display a more intimidating military bearing. I let my gaze travel across the formation one final time. Your entire military philosophy appears to consist of coffee, sarcasm, and hoping everything works out. I stopped, standing perfectly still in the dust, waiting for the inevitable emotional fallout. Instead, one human soldier yawned. Sergeant Jax just casually stretched his shoulders. Then, in the silence, I clearly heard Corporal Myelin whisper to the soldier beside her. "Mark, is it just me, or is he starting to sound exactly like Sergeant Donnelly?" Mark subtly snorted, nodding in agreement. That's it. No outrage, no visible frustration. In fact, the humans seemed strangely accustomed to such insults. The Vren, the Krelk, the Silfari, and the Braca were all showing the desired textbook drop in morale. They looked thoroughly disturbed, insulted, and properly managed. The humans, however, were an anomaly. They didn't break formation, they didn't look down in shame, and they didn't hiss in anger. They seemed entirely thick-skinned, standing there with an unsettling casual calm. Commander Cross didn't even stop sipping from his dented thermal mug. Perhaps they were simply too biologically dim to understand the weight of the degradation. At that point, I should have moved on. The protocol was complete. The exercise was about to begin. Instead, their reaction, or rather, their complete lack of one, irritated me. For the first time that morning, I abandoned the script. I found myself staring directly at Commander Cross. Then, against my better judgment, I started speaking again. "You, Commander, Sterling Steel Cross. Your name is a complete mockery of the title." I noticed several human soldiers stiffen. I continued. "One of your soldiers openly uses military bandwidth to stream entertainment. Your mechanic treats regulations as optional suggestions. Your troops joke during briefings and argue about food in operational meetings. Even now you insist on carrying that mug as though caffeine constitutes a command philosophy. And the truly remarkable part is that none of this happens behind your back." I stepped closer. "It happens because you allow it." My mandibles clicked. "I spent 3 weeks trying to determine whether your unit's behavior was the result of your incompetence or neglect. After observing your leadership, I have concluded the answer is both." Without taking my eyes off Commander Cross, I let my gaze sweep across the human formation. Every single human soldier was staring at me, not laughing, not whispering, just staring. Then Commander Cross finally nodded once. "Appreciate the feedback." Yet I felt a small chill crawl down my spine. The casual amusement that had been present moments earlier was gone. The humans were no longer exchanging glances or whispering among themselves. They stood perfectly still, their attention fixed entirely on me. For the first time that morning, they looked serious. I allowed myself a small measure of satisfaction. At last, I thought. The morale degradation was finally taking effect. I ordered the dropships to launch, eager to watch the canyon simulation prove me right. As expected, the effects of the psychological degradation protocol became evident almost immediately. The Vren formations, normally flawless in their execution, began showing cracks under pressure. Stung by my criticism that they behaved more like parade units than soldiers, Vren officers overcorrected, abandoning proven formations in favor of spontaneous decisions. Scouts hesitated more frequently, commands were questioned unnecessarily, and advantageous positions were surrendered in misguided attempts to demonstrate adaptability. The Krelk responded exactly as predicted. Their wounded pride transformed into reckless aggression. Rather than coordinating deliberate assaults, they launched increasingly direct attacks against Ridge 99. Unfortunately, once the Ridge's defensive network came online, anger alone proved insufficient. Their repeated frontal assaults achieved little beyond providing the defenders with additional target practice. The Silfari suffered perhaps the most visibly. The species that treated marksmanship as a sacred art had taken my criticism to heart. Determined to avoid further mistakes, their shooters became slower and overly cautious, adjusting their aim one time too many and missing opportunities they would have seized effortlessly only days earlier. Even the Bracca began to falter. My remarks regarding their tendency to overanalyze had evidently struck deeper than anticipated. Determined not to validate my criticism, their strategists abandoned their usual deliberative approach in favor of increasingly rushed decisions. On more than one occasion, hasty assaults were launched against Ridge 99's active defenses without adequate preparation, resulting in costly failures that the Bracca themselves would once have considered unthinkable. Then, I shifted my secondary viewing array to monitor the human sector. I noticed a complete, immediate shift in their behavior. The casual, unbothered slouching that had characterized their first 3 weeks was entirely gone. They were not joking around their command terminals anymore. They were not casually arguing about local rations or testing the limits of my patience with sarcastic retorts during operational transitions. Their collective morale was quite obviously down. The light-hearted atmosphere that had previously infected their camp had vanished, replaced by an unsettling, dead silence. Commander Sterling Steel Cross had set his dented thermal mug aside. He was standing rigidly over his central display, his eyes narrowed as he issued short, clipped commands to his staff. Corporal Maya Lin's fingers were moving across her interface at a speed that defied her baseline testing data, her screen completely devoid of the terrestrial comedies she usually streamed. Out in the staging trenches, Sergeant Jax was no longer napping under troop transports. He had disappeared into the maintenance bays alongside his mechanics. The humans had become deathly quiet. Their casual nature was entirely suppressed. My behavioral algorithms flagged the drop in their typical banter as a classic sign of psychological suppression. They were under duress, and I leaned back in my seat, waiting for their plan to inevitably crack under the pressure. Then, something unusual caught my attention. A tactical icon representing a human armored transport suddenly surged ahead of the rest of their advance formation. "Supervisor," one of my operators called out, confusion evident in his voice. "A human transport has broken formation." I leaned forward slightly. On the battlefield feed, the vehicle was tearing across the canyon floor at alarming speed, kicking up enormous plumes of dust as it barreled towards Ridge 99's outer defensive line. It was not scouting terrain. It was not maneuvering into a supporting position. It was charging directly toward the enemy. "Zoom in," I ordered. The optical feed sharpened. Spray painted across the transport's armored hull in large, hastily applied human lettering was a single word. "Feedback." My mandibles clicked. I recognized the word immediately. "What are they doing?" I muttered. The automated defenders had already acquired the target. Ridge 99's outer defense grid came alive as tracking systems locked onto the incoming transport. Simulated plasma fire immediately converged upon the vehicle, warning indicators blooming across the tactical display as cumulative damage began to register. Yet the transport did not slow. I frowned as the vehicle telemetry updated. The humans modified it, I realized. The transport had been stripped of non-essential systems. Troop support modules had been gutted and their power rerouted into the engine and defensive shielding. The frontal plating had been reinforced well beyond standard exercise specifications. Sergeant Jax and his mechanics had transformed an ordinary transport into a breaching ram designed to survive just long enough to reach its destination. They had planned this. Then the driver's hatch burst open. A heavily built human launched himself from the moving vehicle, hit the ground hard, and rolled behind a rocky outcropping just short of the defensive line. The tactical overlay immediately identified him. Sergeant Jax, human mechanic. For a brief moment, I was reminded of the very same mechanic I had observed napping peacefully beneath troop transports during the first 3 weeks of the exercise, except the easygoing indifference was entirely gone. The grin remained, however, even through the choking dust and immense distance of the real-time battlefield feed. I could clearly see it stretching across his face. It was an irritating, almost boyish expression that suggested he was not merely participating in a high-stakes tactical assault. He was genuinely enjoying it. The transport continued onward without slowing. The armored car slammed into the center of the automated defense network. The simulation registered the detonation of multiple breaching charges. For a brief moment, my tactical display was flooded with warning indicators as defender units across the outer perimeter simultaneously went offline. When the dust settled, the first defensive line had ceased to exist. Disabled defender bots littered the canyon floor, their status indicators glowing a uniform crimson. Silence spread through the observation chamber. The humans had sacrificed a valuable transport to breach a fortified position in the opening phase of the assault. It was aggressive, unconventional, and entirely outside the strategic models I had prepared for them. Yet what unsettled me most was not the tactic itself. It was the word still visible on the burning wreckage. Feedback. I found myself staring at it for several seconds. The humans had not simply executed an effective breaching maneuver, they had named it after my criticism. Before the dust from the breach had even settled, human infantry surged through the gap. There were no celebratory shouts, no sarcastic remarks exchanged over the comms. Squad after squad moved with unsettling precision, clearing defender positions and securing footholds with a level of coordination I had not observed from them during the previous 3 weeks. I found myself leaning forward in my seat. That shouldn't have worked. Then again, perhaps they had simply gotten lucky. One successful breaching maneuver, however unconventional, did not invalidate centuries of established psychological doctrine. As the first day progressed, I began noticing a series of increasingly difficult anomalies to explain away. Corporal Meyer Lin repeatedly rerouted reconnaissance drone feeds, exposing blind spots in Ridge 99 sensor coverage that my own staff had overlooked. Commander Cross anticipated several defender counterattacks with unsettling accuracy, repositioning his troops moments before pressure points emerged. Human mechanics returned damaged vehicles to operational status with inexplicable speed, while infantry squads covered one another with a seamless efficiency absent from their earlier performances. None of it was extraordinary in isolation, yet taken together, the pattern became impossible to ignore. The psychological degradation protocol had been refined over centuries of coalition warfare. Its effects were predictable. Morale declined, efficiency suffered, confidence eroded. Every species participating in the exercise had behaved exactly as the doctrine prescribed. Except the humans. The more pressure they endured, the more effective they appeared to become. The realization was absurd enough that I dismissed it immediately. By the dawn of the 4th day, the tactical situation had become impossible to ignore. Despite the numerical disadvantage imposed by constant assaults from the other factions, the humans had advanced deeper into Ridge 99 than any other participating force had managed throughout the entire exercise. The Vren remained trapped outside the secondary defensive belts. The Krelk had exhausted themselves against fortified kill zones. The Silfari struggled to capitalize on fleeting opportunities, while the Brackar found their increasingly rushed offensives collapsing under their own weight. The humans, meanwhile, continued their relentless push toward the command station at the summit. Then their advance stalled. The final approach to Ridge 99's command post had become a brutal bottleneck covered by overlapping defender fields of fire. Any direct assault would trigger enough simulated casualties to halt the attack entirely. I watched Commander Cross study the tactical display for several long moments before issuing a series of clipped orders over the battalion network. At first, nothing appeared to happen. Then Specialist Mark Reynolds broke from cover. I frowned. The human wasn't moving toward the nearest breach point, nor was he reinforcing the ongoing assault against the western barricades. Instead, he sprinted along an exposed approach that offered almost no natural protection from the defender emplacements above. "What is he doing?" I muttered. No one in the command center answered. Pain-round fire erupted around the human as he continued forward. Then the tactical display shifted. A previously overlooked sensor node deep within Ridge 99's defensive lattice abruptly changed status. Only then did I understand. Commander Cross had identified a narrow vulnerability hidden within the overlapping defense network. By activating the isolated relay point, the humans had temporarily disrupted the coordination between several automated emplacements guarding the summit approach. The opening lasted mere seconds. The humans needed only one. As human assault teams surged forward through the collapsing defensive corridor, I found myself staring at Commander Cross's command icon. The maneuver had been deliberate, calculated, and I had completely failed to anticipate it. Human assault teams surged through the collapsing defensive corridor, securing the summit approaches before the automated defenders could re-establish coordination. They moved with the same unnerving efficiency they had displayed throughout the day. No triumphant shouting, no celebrations over the successful maneuver. They simply pressed the attack. Specialist Mark Reynolds remained exposed near the relay node, ensuring the disruption persisted long enough for the final assault to succeed. Then a defender bolt struck him squarely across the faceplate. His suit immediately shifted to crimson. Combat ineffective. The human collapsed hard against the stone. Moments later, the tactical display updated. Ridge 99, command station, compromised. A hush fell over the observation chamber. The humans had done it. Against every prediction, against every established behavioral model, the previously mediocre and aggressively unserious delegation had seized the most heavily defended position in the entire exercise. As part of the standard casualty review process, one of the observation drones briefly focused on Specialist Reynolds. The human writhed against the stone as waves of simulated pain coursed through his nervous system. Even from the safety of the command center, the discomfort was unmistakable. Then he looked upward, directly into the observation drone. A chill spread through my carapace. I knew, with absolute certainty, that he could not possibly know I was watching. Yet it felt as though his gaze had pierced layers of steel, circuitry, and distance to settle directly upon me. Another wave of pain rippled through him. His expression tightened. Then his lips curled upward into a small, devilish smile. Not relief, not pride. Satisfaction, as though the pain had simply been the price of proving a point. I found myself unable to look away from the screen. The image of a human soldier smiling through obvious agony should not have unsettled me more than the loss of Ridge 99 itself. Yet somehow, it did. The siege phase should have favored the attackers. Ridge 99 had fallen quickly, but holding it against the combined efforts of 4 opposing battalions for 3 consecutive days was an entirely different challenge. Human casualties were mounting. Ammunition reserves dwindled. Equipment that had survived the assault now faced constant attrition. By every projection available to my staff, the humans should have begun deteriorating. Instead, they improved. I watched human engineers construct fortifications that exceeded exercise requirements by a frankly absurd margin. Trenches became interconnected defensive networks. Secondary trenches became tertiary trenches. Fallback positions acquired fallback positions of their own. Damaged sensor arrays returned to operation in record time. One particularly exhausted human finally voiced the question occupying my own thoughts. "Why are we even building tertiary fortifications?" he asked, leaning on his entrenching tool. "Nobody's getting through the secondary line." Corporal Maya Lin paused her work long enough to glance upward at one of the hovering observation drones. Then, in a voice just loud enough to carry across the defensive sector, she replied in a voice dripping with manufactured innocence. "Because apparently civilian construction crews have better military bearing than we do." I felt an uncomfortable tightening in my thorax. Several humans nearby snorted. One immediately returned to welding another support brace into place. Another resumed reinforcing an already functional firing position. No one suggested stopping. The tertiary fortifications were completed before dawn. I found myself staring at the newly updated defensive schematics for an uncomfortable length of time. The humans had not built the additional defenses because they were necessary. They had built them because I had implied they couldn't. I found my gaze drifting toward the various human support vehicles shuttling ammunition and construction materials throughout Ridge 99. The familiar practice of painting names upon armored hulls had apparently continued. One troop carrier now bore the title Shameless. Another red field trip. A logistics truck transporting entrenching tools had been christened Unenthusiastic Professional. I felt a growing sense of unease. The humans had not forgotten my remarks. Rather than correcting the offending behavior, they had doubled down on it with alarming enthusiasm. Commander Cross proved equally disturbing. Throughout the entire operation, I had begun noticing an increasingly undeniable pattern. Whenever opposing forces adapted, the humans adapted faster. Weaknesses exploited during the day often vanished entirely by nightfall. Defensive sectors reinforced, supply routes rerouted, countermeasures implemented with unsettling speed. He anticipated enemy responses with alarming consistency, repositioned assets before vulnerabilities could be exploited, and somehow managed to transform the once aggressively mediocre battalion into one of the most adaptable fighting forces I had ever supervised. More irritatingly, the dented thermal mug was always there. I observed Commander Cross carrying it throughout Ridge 99, as though it were an inseparable component of his uniform. During briefings, inspections, and command updates, it remained within arm's reach. I once noticed him deliberately lingering near an observation drone while issuing orders to his staff. The mug was empty. I verified this personally through the drone's optical feed, yet he continued carrying it, as if merely to remind me of my own words. His military philosophy had not, in fact, ceased to consist of coffee. The difference was that it had somehow begun working. I had intended the psychological degradation protocol to reduce efficiency through damaged confidence. The humans had transformed criticism into a to-do list. As the seventh day approached, attacks against Ridge 99 became increasingly desperate. The Krelk launched repeated heavy frontal assaults. The Vren attempted flanking operations. The Braca revised their strategies. The Silfari searched relentlessly for weaknesses in the human defenses. None succeeded. Human defenders met each assault with a level of preparation that bordered on obsessive. At precisely 1800 hours on the final day, the exercise timer expired. Silence settled across the observation chamber. Then the tactical display updated. Ridge 99. Status: secured. Victor. United Earth Delegation. For several moments, no one spoke. 3 weeks earlier, the humans had been classified as competent but unremarkable participants. 7 days earlier, they had entered the final exercise phase, carrying the lowest projected success rate among all battalions. Now they stood victorious atop Ridge 99. I stared at the battlefield display, my thoughts drifting unwillingly toward the spray-painted transport labeled Feedback, a mechanic who had grinned while fleeing an armored battering ram, and a soldier who had smiled through simulated agony after securing the summit. The data before me was undeniable. The more thoroughly my protocol had undermined every other species, the more dangerous the humans had become, and I still had absolutely no idea how. Professor Talix's crystalline markings flickered uncertainly. "So," she said slowly, "the humans became more effective because you insulted them." Kheron's mandibles clicked. "No," he said. "They became more effective because I insulted their commander." Talix stared. "My mathematics make no sense of it." Kheron let out a long, weary hiss. "After the exercise ended, I sought out Commander Cross," he said. "I demanded an explanation. According to every model available to the Coalition, his battalion should have collapsed by the second day." "And what did he say?" Talix asked. "He was seated atop an ammunition container, reviewing after-action reports," Kheron recalled, while Corporal Maya Lin watched one of her terrestrial comedies alongside several soldiers. Periodic bursts of laughter drifted across the camp. He listened patiently. Then he looked at me and said, "General, where I come from, there are few things more satisfying than making a smug bastard eat his own words." Talix's crystalline patterns froze. "That cannot possibly be the entire explanation." "I know," I told him. Kheron paused. Commander Cross simply shrugged. "Honestly, General," Kheron quoted, "we were probably going to coast through the final week." He stared into the distance. "My people are used to criticism." He paused. "But then, you insulted their commander. That became personal." Kheron fell silent. For several moments, the retired general simply sat there, his gaze fixed somewhere far beyond the cafeteria windows. Professor Talix waited patiently. "So," she said at last, her crystalline markings flickering uncertainly. "That's spite." Kheron's mandibles clicked. "I believe humans call it that." He rose from the table, collecting his tray. "Personally," he said, "I still think it sounds like a design flaw." The retired general began walking toward the cafeteria exit. After a few steps, he turned his head slightly toward the Callion. "That is what Catalyst discovered during the Great Audit, Professor." His mandibles clicked softly. Other species fight for glory, for survival, or for logic. But a human? A human will alter the fundamental trajectory of cosmic physics and suffer immense localized agony, purely for the unrivaled satisfaction of looking into your eyes and saying, "Watch me."